We have opinions on everything. Yeah. There's no topic that we won't discuss, and we'll go places that other shows wouldn't dare. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can catch it here, news on the flip side, only on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world needs to hear the truth.
Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. Good to be with you this Saturday night. And, indeed, and Diesel's back.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah,
well,
good to be back.
Yeah, where'd you go? You did some weird paranormal investigations or something, didn't you?
Yeah, I've had some pretty crazy ramblings over the past 6 weeks. We went out to Bobby Mackey's, went out to Cincinnati. I've been doing a bunch of ITC experiments, and it's been a lot of crazy ups and downs, man. But it's been a really interesting time. So, but I'm glad to be back chatting up the Mabus radio show with you guys. So.
That's right, and. So, did you chronicle it in some way, or write it down, or I mean, what's the evidence? Photographs?
I have tons of data. We usually collect a lot of EVP from Bob's. I didn't have any type of real EVP that I've discovered. We used parabolic dishes and a couple other techniques. I experimented with the instrumental transcommunication bridge, and that's where I really feel like I possibly hit some pay dirt there. With some of the stills that I put up on Facebook and stuff like that. People can check that out. And it's always a good experience down there with Wanda K and the Bobby Mackey tours and all that. So, and then other than that, it's just been all, just experiments, hanging out at the lab and go nuts,
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, tonight's guest is Kevin D. Randall. He has a book out called Alien Mysteries, Conspiracies, and Cover-Ups. We're going to get into that heavily, but first I'm just going to mention the guests for the next few weeks. Next Saturday night is Jay Mabus. We're going to be talking about Sierra Sasquatch, and that should be an interesting show. He's a surgeon, all kinds of stuff. They definitely should be very interesting. And then on May 4th, Rob and Trish McGregor, Aliens in the Backyard. Looking forward to that one. The 11th of May is Elias Lyonsdale, and that's the Christ Letters, and it's kind of I just interviewed him on Examiner, and strange story. I guess it was his wife passed away, and from behind the veil, she conveyed a message about Christ consciousness, and just hearing it, you're like, oh, hoo-wah, but once you start reading how down to earth he is, and just there's an honesty to him. It even kind of touched me some. And at first I was like, alrighty, but it's something. So it's definitely something to tune in to. May 18th, Ken Bateman. He has a lot of reptilian experiences. I believe he's been on Joe's show before a long time ago. He said he had. Still working on the 25th. That just came open, so I'm working on a guest for that. But just quickly about June 1st, Mike Mayo he wrote Gorehound's, basically a book about horror films. He's just going to come on and talk about horror movies all night. So I love horror movies. June 8th, Ed Cormarak. Also working on a guy about Dracula, Jim Steinmeier. He was just on Coast to Coast and wrote a book called Who Was Dracula? Bram Stoker's Trail of Blood. I should know about that pretty soon. Another dude, June 15th, Dr. Eric Pearl. He wrote a book called Reconnection. He's been on the Dr. Oz show and some very interesting scenarios about healing yourself. And then one I'm really excited about is Peter Levenda, which is June 22nd. Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah. I'll have to get you in on that one if you're available for sure. I can't wait for that one. Definitely. And then the last, and he wrote a new book called The Dark Lord about H.P. Lovecraft and Kenneth Anger. And it should be pretty weird, dark.
Yeah, I just got my elder son tattoo, so I'm safe from Shoggoths.
Really? What, an elder god? You talking about Lovecraft stuff?
Yeah, it's the elder sign, so I don't have to fear from chthonic entities anymore.
From the ancient ones?
Right.
You're protected? Well, that's good. Yeah. And the last guest for June, Gypsy Elaine Teague, about steampunk magic, which is definitely kind of unique. So that's our guest coming up for churchofmabusradio.com, and you're listening to UFO Paranormal Radio Network. And basically, prayers out to the victims of Boston situation. I'm not going to get into that heavily.
Sure.
I just talked about it on the show beforehand, and just a little respect out to the victims of that. And that's about it. I don't want to go down that road. You can see my personal Facebook page in the Church of Mabus group to see me raising Cain about that. Mostly, as far as conspiracies go with that, I'm at this point, I don't put anything past anyone. But the one thing that's really been bugging me about that is these people that are saying the victims are actors. They drive me freaking crazy. I've been cussing them out all week. I had to get off Facebook for a blood pressure check. There's an idiot on there posting a picture of the mayor from Boston and saying he was John Candy.
Yeah.
People are idiots.
I'm definitely on par with you on that, man. They tried to do the same thing at Sandy Hook and all these other terrible things that have happened. And I definitely think that that's a little out of bounds. Yeah.
I got so mad, I was like, I got to get off Facebook and just watch a comedy movie. I watched The Guilt Trip with Seth Rogen and, what's that? I can't remember, Barbara Streisand or something. To get the hell off. It's pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. But anywho, that's my only thing, with that. So I don't want to get into that subject. I just got into it on news on the flip side. Let's get to our guest. Kevin, are you there?
I be here.
Yes. Welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we got your book from VisibleInkPress.com. I love it, by the way. And everybody, make sure you check out VisibleInkPress.com. Alien Mysteries, Conspiracies, and Cover-Ups is there with Kevin Randall, and Brad Steiger has a lot of good books there that I've interviewed him on, and there's lots of great stuff there, so definitely that's Visible Ink Press. So I guess, Kevin, let's open up with exactly a little bit about your background, origins-wise, and what exactly got you into the UFO subject, just as an opener for our audience.
I always blame my mother for that.
Yeah.
Back in the olden days, she was a fan of science fiction, and science fiction, of course, is about alien visitation, interstellar flight, and alien civilizations. And so it's not a big step from science fiction into UFOs, which is about alien visitation and interstellar flight and alien civilization. So I believe that my interest in the topic came from her interest in science fiction. She kind of led me into that. In fact, as a little kid, I remember she took me to a movie called Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Yeah.
So,
that's awesome.
which, by the way, as a little kid, scared the hell out of me.
Right.
But, so that's sort of where my interest generated.
So from your childhood, just an interest through sci-fi and kind of led up to everything. And how many books do you have out? This is what number is this book as far as how many have you created so far?
Total books, I don't know, 115, 120. I've lost track. I should count.
Wow.
Well, but they're not all on UFOs, obviously.
Yeah.
I've written a bunch of science fiction. I've written action adventure. I wrote a murder mystery. I've done some horror books. I've done a little bit of everything. And just recently, for the most part, since my return from Iraq, I've just done UFO stuff. So I got quite a few UFO books out as well. Brad Steiger and I argue about who has the most UFO books out and who's written the most UFO books in the world. And it's one of us.
Wow.
Although Nick Redfern's making a real run at it.
Right.
I was going to say that. I need some of that mojo in there. That's what you were reminding me of, Nick Redfern. He pumps some things out like crazy. Yeah, I'm trying to write a book. I need some of that mojo there. Y'all got going for sure.
Well, you need a computer. And you need to be able to touch type.
Yeah. Yeah.
The two secrets to writing a book: computer and touch typing. Back in the olden days,
GWERTY.
Back in the olden days, I had to write a book on a regular typewriter, and boy, was that ugly.
I bet. So, as far as you're still in the military. You just said you got back from Iraq. Was that recent?
I retired from the Iowa National Guard back in 2009. I retired as a lieutenant colonel. And I'd been in the Army off and on. I'd been in the Air Force off and on, the Air Force Reserve off and on since 1967. So it wasn't a complete and total run from 67 to my retirement, but there was times when I was on active duty and times when I was in the reserves and times when I didn't do anything.
Yeah, I see on your Wikipedia page, I believe it says that you piloted the UH-1 helicopters.
I was a Huey helicopter pilot in Vietnam. Yes.
Well, that had to be an extremely intense job. Like hats off. Yeah.
It was quite exciting at times, and other times it was really boring.
Yeah.
But the good thing is, which most people don't know, the navigation system covered the commercial broadcast band, so we could listen to the radio as we flew our helicopters. We listened to AFVN.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the big secret is, every morning we would hear this Army PFC Pat Sajak scream, "Good morning, Vietnam." I always thought that he was in the States recording these things on tapes and sending them to Vietnam, but it turns out he was actually in Saigon doing that. So I don't know what happened to Pat Sajak after he left his gig at Armed Forces Radio. I never heard from him again. Yes,
you're talking about the Wheel of Fortune guy, right?
That's exactly who it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy's an android. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't think he's human, but that's just me.
Right.
It's like Alex Trebek.
There you go.
It's going to take some further investigation on that one.
I did a series of books called Vietnam Ground Zero, and in the glossary we mentioned something about that. About the spinning wheel of fortune doesn't tell us what happened to Pat Sajak.
Right.
And there was a joke. There was a joke in the glossary which said horse sea biscuit, and if you looked up biscuit, it said it was rations. But we just made that up because we wanted to say, a horse was sea biscuit. And nobody ever seemed to have caught the joke. So, but I digress.
Spin that wheel, baby. That's right. So when it comes to the UFO subject and you being in the military, has that ever been like a conflict of interest? Have they ever said, "Hey," or have they ever approached you about writing this kind of stuff, or they just have never said anything about it at all?
There's a lot of interesting stories that relate to that. When I first got into the Air Force, I'd written a number. It was before I'd written books, but I'd written quite a few magazine articles. Mm-hmm. And I got to the new base, Richard Gebauer Air Force Base, which used to be south of Kansas City. And the host officer was showing me around, and we went to lunch at the Officers Club. And then somehow we got off on the topic of UFOs. So he was telling me about this article he'd read in the magazine, and I said, yeah, I know that. I wrote that. And then later on, he was telling me about another article. I said, yeah, I wrote that one too. So coincidentally, he told me about a couple of articles I'd written about UFOs. But that didn't interfere with my Air Force career at all. I know when I was approached by the commander to take over an intelligence job with the wing, they had to do a background check for a top secret clearance. And it turned out that the guy doing the background check, lived across the street from my father, so he knew what was going on. And I know that they had purchased a number of the magazines, which were in the file about my sort of rabidly anti-Air Force positions on UFOs, but I got the security clearance anyway.
Right.
So I've never had a problem with that. The only thing that was ever said to me was when I got on active duty with the Guard, just prior to our deployment, the battalion commander said, if you're doing this UFO stuff, you really shouldn't put your rank on it while you're serving. So,
yeah,
and in that respect, he was right. Although I was doing articles for the local newspapers about what our battalion was doing while we were serving, and I was always identified by my military rank in that, and that was actually the regulations said you could do that. So, the UFO stuff is a little bit different. The stuff I was doing about what our battalion was doing and what our jobs were and the things we were observing in Iraq, that putting my rank on it just had no ramifications whatever. The whole point of this, in my entire military career, there has never been any negative ramifications of my UFO studies.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah, I mean, how do you feel about the claims or the positions that people have made that they have been given quite a hard time about their interest or involvement in UFO activity?
I think if it's just an interest and they're talking about all this negative influence on them, I think that may be a little bit of hyperbole. But if you're talking about someone who observes something,
right,
and I can think of lots and lots of people in that category, starting with the guys at Roswell, that's a whole different kettle of fish. And
Sure.
I know from talking to people involved in that whole thing. Major Edwin Easley, the provost marshal at Roswell in 1947, told me flat out he'd been told not to talk about it. He was sworn to secrecy.
Right.
So they were sworn to secrecy about these events, and I know that others have talked about some negative ramifications of their observations, seeing things, but that they're in the position of seeing something as opposed to someone like me who sort of investigates and writes about it on my own time. So. If it's somebody who is not involved with the sighting or some kind of classified material going along with this, I don't put much stock in that. If it's somebody who's seen something, witnessed something, and been involved in that fashion, then I think there has been some things said to them just to keep it quiet. But
Sure.
The thing that we all have to remember is that when you enter the military arena,
right,
you're exposed to a great deal of material, or can be exposed to a great deal of material that is highly classified.
right,
And a lot of it doesn't relate to UFOs. But the point is, you are obligated to keep that material secret,
right,
because it supposedly impacts national security. And I could, for the longest time, I could never tell anybody. The only cockpit of a fighter plane I ever sat in was a MiG-23. But, how did you happen to sit in a MiG-23? Well, I happened to have, because I had a top secret clearance, I could get into a specific area, and they had a full-blown MiG-23 there. And says, you want to sit in? And I said, sure. Climbed into this little tiny cockpit. I'm thinking, I'd like to fly about 2 hours in this thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to the helicopter where you could stretch out a little bit when the mood moved you.
I can definitely agree with the idea of full disclosure in a sense, but I really see your point. I've always understood that you have this kind of confidentiality. I mean, it's the responsibility of the armed forces or the people who witness this to, I guess, control the situation until they can get a good handle on it. And if you're privy to the information, then you should know. And then, like you say, you've agreed to keep your mouth shut.
There's another problem that enters into this, and we're told this repeatedly when you study the history of UFOs, is that they do not present a threat to national security.
Right.
Well, if there's no threat to national security, then there is no reason for the stuff to be classified. It always comes down to that. Why would you classify this stuff? Well, it impacts national security. How does it do that? And they say that from the Robertson panel in 1953. That was always sort of the battle cry. There is no threat to national security, and it was the way they kind of bought their way out of having to investigate UFOs. The Air Force at least, by saying, well, there's no national security implication here, therefore we don't have to do this.
Right.
We can look at cases that follow up, the cases that Robert Hastings has investigated of the intrusions in the SAC facilities on the northern tier of states. Well, if the UFOs are flying over missile silos, if the UFOs are flying over weapon storage facilities, that impacts national security.
Right.
And there they are obligated to respond to that. So, I mean, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. But for the most part, some guy seeing something in the sky doesn't really affect national security, especially after all these years. We know that this has been going on since before the beginning of World War II, for example. Everybody in the UFO field says, well, it started on June 24th, 1947, when Kenneth Arnold made the sighting. And my answer is no, it didn't. It started long before that. And you can talk about the Foo Fighters in World War II, and Keith Chester has done a marvelous book about that shows that it was not just glowing balls of light, but a lot more than that was involved. And there was a major interest by the Allied High Command to determine what these things were, and were they some sort of new weapon used by the Germans or used by the Japanese, some kind of anti-aircraft weapon. And we moved to the Ghost rockets over Sweden or Scandinavia in 1946 before we really get into the material that was going on in the United States starting in 1947. So you've got this history that goes back beyond 1947, and the guys who were involved in some of those investigations were involved in the stuff that was going on in 1947. So they're aware of this whole history as they begin their investigations.
And then, of course, you have the ancient sightings. You get into that in your book. I love that kind of stuff. Like that stuff is wonderful.
There's some great stuff there, but you also have to ask yourself, with their lack of scientific knowledge back in the ancient world, does a flaming sword seen over a river, is that really a bolide as opposed to a meteor fall as opposed to some kind of alien craft? And there's really no way to separate what might have been a bolide. And I know even in the modern world, as we look at that stuff, there used to be a program on the Science Channel called Meteorite Men, and they show them periodically again. But they had shown at the beginning of a couple of programs meteor falls that had been videotaped. And you look at that stuff, and you look at some of the drawings made of UFOs, especially the cigar-shaped craft with windows on it, and you're going, you get just a glimpse of that, and it looks for all the world just exactly what these people drawing. You wonder, did they see a bolide that kind of fooled them, causing them to think they'd seen a cigar-shaped craft with windows on it? So when you look at the ancient world, you've got a real problem of interpretation of what they really saw and what they really meant. But it's fun stuff to look at. Right.
Yeah, I mean, even I completely agree with you in the fact that in the modern age, I think that stuff is still really magical and fascinating. Even though we know what's going on, it's actually seeing it is a lot different than when we just read about it or see like a clip or something like that. And so I mean, I definitely see how these people's minds would just be blown by this.
One of the things I did in the book is, and one of the reasons I wanted to explore that was because while I was in Iraq, I had a chance to go to Babylon. So I've got all these pictures of Babylon. Awesome. And I'm thinking, what can I write so I can use these pictures of Babylon? So that was one of the inspirations. But one of the other inspirations was the out of place artifacts, which are fascinating too. These things that are found when they're not supposed to be, nails pulled out of granite and things like that.
Like anachronisms. And...
That was my next subject, spooks. Am I saying that right? Yeah.
Those have always fascinated me, and I did a lot of researches into that. But one of the things I did do is everybody had always talked about in the UFO books about this vessel, this metallic vessel, having been blown out of solid rock from a quarry in Massachusetts back in the mid-19th century. And it said it was written up in the Scientific American. Well, I was going to the University of Iowa, and in their bound periodicals, they had a whole run of Scientific American, starting when it was first published. And so they talked about the, and I didn't have the exact date. They always said 1950 or 1850, 1851, something like that. So I looked in the 1851 Scientific American, and I couldn't find it. Yeah. And so I thought, well, let's look at the 1850, and it wasn't there. But I found it in the 1852 Scientific American on June 8th, by the way. And so I found this article, this little curiosity article in there. And it's really not, the interesting thing is not they found this metal vessel blown out of solid rock, because it's not clear whether it really was blown out of rock or it was something that had become associated with materials at the top of the rock, and they found it after they had made detonated the explosives. They found this thing among the debris, so it was never clear whether it was embedded in the rock or it was embedded in the ground above the rock. But what was interesting was they're talking about they should get some kind of scientist to look at it, and they talk about it may have been manufactured by Tubal-Cain. Although the Scientific American, it looked like it said tuba-cane, and when I first found this, I don't know what that means,
Right.
But as I got to looking at the Xerox I made of it, it looked like the L had come out of alignment at the end of the column, and so the word was really Tubal-Cain. And in today's world, you take a look at you want to look something up. What's the first thing you do? Well, you don't go to the library, you don't go to Britannica, you type it in Google. Or should I say Bing, to give them equal footing. But you type it into your search engine and find out, and all this stuff about Tubal-Cain comes up. And it turns out that this has really nothing to do with this little metallic vessel. This has to do with Masonic rites. And so then you begin to wonder, was this some kind of message being sent to Masonic members in the United States or around the world in the mid-1800s? Is that really what it was about? Tubal-Cain's mentioned in the Bible as a blacksmith, and so you wonder if this has something else to do. It's really not about the metallic vessel from ancient past. It's really now about this Tubal-Cain guy, and what does that mean? And so you can look at that stuff up. And I mean, when I first found this stuff in the mid-1970s, the article back in the mid-1970s, you're thinking. That means nothing. And how do you look up Tubal-Cain? Well, you can go to the library, you can look it up in encyclopedia. But in today's world, you type it into your search engine, and everything you wanted to know about it pops up. So that was one of the interesting things that happened when I was doing that. But these out of place artifacts are really fascinating. And then you wonder, was there a civilization around the time of the dinosaurs? And the reason the dinosaurs disappeared was they hunted them into extinction.
Right.
And then they lost their food source, so they all died out. And of course, it was 65 million years ago. So the only thing you find left from them are these little bizarre things found in rock now. So.
Right. It's almost like everything's up to interpretation to a point. It's like with discoveries like Göbekli Tepe and all these other like monuments and properties that we're finding that predate what we thought was the oldest thing at one point in time. I mean, it's always safe to say that we really don't know what's happened, over these, millions and millions of years, billions, like 4.5 billion years or whatever that the Earth is supposed to have existed, that we only have, little pieces,
we can only go back 10, 12,000 years with any great confidence, and we get much beyond that. Now we start guessing about stuff. We talk about the mass extinction about 11,000, 13,000 years ago on North American continent. They're talking, well, maybe that was meteoric in origin, but we can't find the crater because it would have hit the glaciers.
The ocean.
It hit the glaciers, and all evidence of it disappeared when the glaciers melted.
Right.
So you've got all these interesting things going on. So that's the interesting thing about the out of place artifact. Were these nails really found encased in granite, or is there some other explanation, some more mundane, boring explanation, as opposed to somebody dropping a nail, several 100 million years ago?
Right. I mean, you definitely have to have a good sense of humor to see that perspective. That it would be kind of a cosmic joke in a way that people thought there was great meaning behind this accident.
And then the other thing that's always kind of cracked me up is one of the archaeological dating methods is you associate with the strata of material that it's found in. So you're always assuming that it was dropped on the surface of the ground and was covered up through the natural accumulation of debris and whatnot,
right,
over the millennia. And then you think, well, gee whiz, we bury our garbage. What if the Neanderthal did that too?
Right.
And so now you've got stuff associated with a level much older than it makes sense. It's because they buried the stuff, and we never thought about that.
Right.
It wasn't dropped at that time; it was buried at that time. So
something that we think's revolutionary has already happened.
Yeah.
But we just didn't give these guys enough credit.
Well, and as I said, again, searching for a way to use my Babylon pictures, I wanted to do something with the Baghdad batteries, because here are batteries that clearly generate some kind of electrical current. Well, what the hell would they be doing with a battery 2,000 years ago?
What are they using it for?
And the only thing anybody ever came up with was, well, maybe they used it in some kind of electroplating process, but there's no evidence that the batteries created a current of sufficient magnitude to be able to do anything like that. So you've got these batteries that they created, and maybe there was something else going on that we just don't know about, but it generated an electrical current, and maybe that wasn't the purpose of them, but it's kind of an interesting thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it could be that we're just missing a pretty big piece to understanding that puzzle.
Well, and the other thing that I just saw the other day was they found some carvings on a stone, front and back of the stone, and they can't read them, and it's from no known language, and it matches nothing else that's ever been found.
Wow.
And, how would you figure out what that darn thing said?
Right.
It could be great what it says if you could read it, but there's probably no way they're ever going to translate. The only way we could translate the hieroglyphics was because of the Rosetta Stone.
Right.
What a marvelous key to allow us to unlock that, but without that, we'd still be puzzling about the hieroglyphics, I would imagine.
Right, and that was a pretty big advance in being able to decipher that.
Well, even with the Rosetta Stone, it still took them decades to
I mean, maybe
work
it
out.
just. Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe this thing just says "Eat at Joe's," but it would still be amazing to be able to understand that,
Yes. It just be they had advertising back then.
There was I know an Ancient Aliens episode where they were in Egypt and there were some kind of lights that they found or that was drawn in the hieroglyphics that it looked like they had these big tubes with like lights, and maybe the batteries were hooked to lights. But that's Baghdad, two different places, but some kind of weird lights that I remember on one of those shows that they talked about a whole lot. And it was they showed the hieroglyphics. Yeah, and it showed like the gods holding some big weird tubes, and they kind of thought maybe it was like these weird lamps or something bizarre like that.
I actually discussed that in the book. So what the mundane, boring interpretation is that it is really not a light bulb with a bizarre filament in it, but it's really two entwined snakes sort of encapsulated as one of their visions of creation. So there's the mundane interpretation. But when I was studying archaeology at the University of Iowa, the one thing that always kind of cracked me up is if they had found some kind of an artifact, they didn't know exactly what it was or what it did. They said, well, it had religious significance. That was a catch-all explanation. Well, it had religious significance. So you've got a drawing on the wall or carved on the wall, and it looks like a light bulb, and we shouldn't have any light bulbs. Well, maybe it had this religious significance to it.
I noticed that when I was researching Göbekli Tepe that they kept bringing it up as a sacred site, and I was just kind of thinking, like, a sacred site for what? Why does it keep going back to this? And then I just kind of realized that it's kind of a commonality that answers all questions. You know, it's allowed to be a mystery if it's based around spiritual terms.
And the other thing you can take a look at is, you know, maybe they were just creating a secret society that they could exclude somebody from. Because what's the fun of having a club if you can't keep people out?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of these ancient sightings and stuff definitely are interesting, but I was going to jokingly say that a lot of those guys were all on shrooms back then, so no telling what they were doing. They were tripping out back then all the time, even more so than now.
Yeah, that's true too. But they didn't have all the diversions for us. I mean, what would you do without cable TV and the internet? You know? Imagine a world without the internet. No, I don't have to. I grew up in that world.
Yeah, definitely. They would breed and rule and conquer, and like they do now, pretty much, I guess. But yeah. So, what do you think this the computer is? I was just looking at the name of it and trying to say it in my head. The Antikythera computer. What in the hell is that thing? What do you think that is? That
clearly was a device that was created by the Greeks 2,000 years ago, something around the time of Christ, that predicted the movements of the planets.
Okay.
Now, granted, they didn't have all the planets there, and they certainly didn't know about the dwarf planets, but they had everything from the rocky planets out to the gas giants through Saturn. They had seen all of those planets, and this computer was a device that, as you turned it, it would predict where the moon would be, where the sun would be, where the planets would be. It was a way of computing where they had been or where they would be in the future, and it worked according to how they've reconstructed parts of it. It worked to an amazing degree of accuracy. And when it was first found, you know, people were kind of leery about saying, well, this was a computer that would do that. But I guess since then, in some of the writings of the ancient Greeks, they've actually found descriptions of these devices. So it wasn't all that it was uncommon. The wealthy, the ruling elite had access to them and that sort of thing. But I mean, they developed a computer that would predict the movements of the planets actually the planets around Earth as opposed to around the sun, but I mean it predicted it very, very accurately, and that's an amazing feat for a group of people who didn't know that. We always seem to concentrate on the old world on that, but I guess the Maya had an amazing ability to understand astronomy that exceeded what the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians could do. They were even more further advanced. Good English. They were further advanced than the old world civilizations. The one thing they didn't have were telescopes. Otherwise, they'd have probably discovered the moons of Jupiter and the moons of Saturn.
Yeah, I mean they had large observation areas, but I think that all these people made some pretty awesome discoveries. You know, considering that they had, we can only assume that they had nothing to work with, like the type of tools we have today. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing you have to remember is they had to have a way of capturing the information and transmitting it down generations. I mean, one of the things that we can do is what I write today can be built on by somebody 100 years from now to draw better conclusions. And the Mayans were able to communicate across generations and make these observations and realize that there was a reoccurrence of them. And they could say, well, you know, when this happens, we can expect this to happen.
Right.
So, I mean, it's amazing that they were able to create a system of capturing the data and passing it along, not just through memory, but through writing it down. And thankfully, the Spanish burned a lot of their books before we got a chance to look at them.
So, in your the Cover Up Begins chapter, what can you tell us about the Rhodes photographs and those sightings as far as the story, pretty much?
Well, the interesting thing is, on July 7th, 1947, a guy named William Rhodes took 2 photographs of an object that flew over his house near Phoenix. And it wasn't a point of light. It wasn't really a fuzzy object. It was one of the pictures is fairly clear. And the Army Air Forces at the time investigated this. The problem they ran into is this is just a couple of weeks after Kenneth Arnold made his sighting, and Arnold's talking about these objects, and he's not really talking about circular objects. He's talking about objects that have a blunt nose and a more of a heel-shaped object than the common thing we think of. And this, I think, based on what I've seen in the documentation, and I should stress that the documentation is there for anybody who wants to read it. This frightened the military and the scientific community, because what Rhodes photographed is basically what Arnold described. Mm-hmm. And so now you've got Arnold, and the one thing I should ask David Rudiak about was how detailed in the newspapers, especially the Phoenix newspapers, did they get about the flying saucers prior to the Rhodes photographs? Because Rhodes photographs match this. Arnold had an opportunity to talk to 2 guys from Hamilton Air Force Base, 2 intelligence officers came up to interview him after his sighting, and they told him, well, if anything comes up, let us know. And he got involved in another investigation, and so they came up to talk to him. And in the course of that investigation, which turned out to be a hoax, this other investigation, Arnold asked him about what they had seen, and they talked about, well, we just got these pictures from Phoenix, on July 7th. And the one guy drew a picture of an illustration of what the picture looked like. They didn't have pictures with it, but which reminded everybody of what Arnold had to say, or what Arnold had seen. So you've got this connection, and later on I found in the Project Grudge final report, there's a discussion of the Rhodes photographs in there. Well, and J. Allen Hynek mentioned specifically that these looked an awful lot like the things that Arnold described. So there's that connection there. But the military didn't like this. I don't think they liked Rhodes. I think Rhodes, from what I understand, was kind of an abrasive person. They didn't like the fact that they couldn't figure out what he did for a living. He had a laboratory in the back of his house where he did inventing and that sort of thing, and had some grandiose name for it. So they didn't really like that, and they kind of made fun of this guy that he was living off the income of his wife, and he was a part-time musician and all this. And what you find out later on, I got a call several years ago, and a guy had known Rhodes. Rhodes had just passed away, and he'd known Rhodes, and he said he was getting a short shift. Turns out the guy was an inventor. He had several patents. He was living off the royalties of his patents. He had worked for the Department of Navy during part of World War II, and when Kitt Peak was being built by the University of Arizona, they wanted him to come down and assist in building some of the equipment, some of the very specialized equipment, because he had a talent for creating the things they would need. Sure. And apparently he rubbed some of those people the wrong way, and that never worked out. But he had... In Rhodes was talking about his PhD, and it's kind of a bizarre situation, whether he had one or not, and whether it was some kind of specialized deal. But when he worked for the Department of the Navy during World War II, they had come to these people and they'd said, the problem is we don't have a lot of highly educated people working. They had highly educated but not degreed people working there. And they said, well, so they gave them a series of tests. And if you scored so high on the test, they gave you equivalency of a master's degree. If you scored higher, they gave you the equivalency of a PhD for some kind of accounting purposes. So Rhodes apparently scored high enough that he was given the equivalency of a PhD. So he took this to mean that one had been conferred on him. And I mean, if it's a little bit of hyperbole, who really cares about that? And you really shouldn't, but this offended the people at the University of Arizona because he talked about his PhD and he didn't like the way they were treating him. So he was abrasive. He had this degree that was a little bit funny. And so the Air Force looked at all of that stuff, and they just dismissed his case as a hoax because and I think the reason, frankly, is they didn't like him. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of ran him down. Not to mention the fact that if Rhodes photographed the things that Arnold saw, they got a real problem. Right. They didn't want to really talk about that either. So they write it off as a hoax, and they've explained that to their satisfaction. Mm-hmm. When they went to interview him the first time, it was an Army counterintelligence guy and an FBI agent. So the FBI agent showed the credentials, and they said and it introduced the Army guy as this is my colleague, Special Agent so and so. The guy was counterintelligence. Didn't tell him he was Army counterintelligence because the Army didn't want to know they were out there investigating him, so they kept that on the down low. Right. So there was some kind of bizarre stuff going on, and I read the file that the Air Force had on Rhodes, and I read some of the other stuff that's available. And I think the whole thing has been written off as a hoax, and I just don't think that's been done fairly. I think there's more to it than that, and Rhodes got the short shift on that. But right. Rhodes kind of brought it on himself too with his personality, and I can understand that. So it's a lot of things. The Air Force wrote that the neighbor said, well, he was a good neighbor, but he had a habit of shooting cats and dogs coming on his property. I'm thinking, this is not a good neighbor shooting cats in the neighborhood. Yeah. No matter what you say, so there's this disconnect in the file. Well, he's a bad guy. Well, the neighbor said he was okay, but he shot their pets. I don't get it. So it's
but for some reason, they weren't mad at him. Like he's all right, but he shot my dog.
The interesting thing is he's got the two photographs, and there's really no evidence that they were hoaxed. There's no evidence that they were faked, and they match what Arnold had said. And the one thing I haven't done and I need to do, and David Rudiak will be a big help on that, is find out in the newspapers of that era how much of a description of what Arnold saw was published. And if you don't have the precise information like that was given by Arnold to the Air Force, and we know exactly what he said and what he drew because we have all those documents, then that increases the importance of the Rhodes photographs.
Right.
Yeah, I'm looking at the pictures now, and they're definitely just weird. Like the shapes, it's not something you normally see as far as some of the UFO stuff now. They're definitely weird, like just strange. One of them looks like the Millennium Falcon or something, but they're black and just really unique as far as UFO pictures go. Definitely weird.
The other thing you have to remember is when you take a look at the photographs. I mean, if he's faking something, he's faking it based on a description he may not have had, so he couldn't really do that. And so you've got to write off the pictures as a hoax, because if they're not a hoax, then they demonstrate something that performs outside the envelope available to the aircraft of our time, or of their time.
Yeah.
That becomes another level of evidence. You not only have the eyewitness testimony of what happened, you've got the photographs that you can take a look at. And there's nothing in the photographs to suggest they're fake, because you see the photographs. It's this dark object against the actually a overcast sky. So there's no way to determine the size. There's no way to determine the speed based on the photographs, other than you've got them as showing something in the sky.
Yeah, and to make up something like that back in the 40s, it's just, that's a pretty keen imagination to make just the shape of it and everything. It's just definitely peculiar.
Well, the other thing you have to remember is back in that era, when they started talking about flying saucers and flying discs, they applied it to everything, whether they were disc-shaped or not. So they're talking about flying saucer report. It could have been a glowing ball of light. It could have been spherical. It could have been triangular. It could have been cigar-shaped. They were all flying saucers. So they applied the term flying saucer regardless of the shape of the object.
So, in your opinion, I mean, being somebody who is really knowledgeable in this field, how has the descriptions of these UFOs changed over time? I mean, do you see consistency Do you see big changes? And like, how do you feel people are being affected now versus then?
The problem I've always had is a lot of the objects described are too small to be interstellar craft. At least we assume that because interstellar distances would be so great. I mean, how would you like to be cooped up in a car-sized object for crossing interstellar distances? So you postulate some sort of a mothership, and then you think, well, an aircraft carrier. And an aircraft carrier has lots of different kinds of aircraft. They're not all fighters. They have some transports. They have some helicopters. They have they have various kinds of fighters. So you've got people seeing a wide range of craft, but they could all come from a single mothership. Or you could postulate you've got various alien races involved in it. So their designs of the craft would be different than somebody else's design of the craft. So I'm not sure that when we look at that, it's an important question to answer. I don't know if it really would lead us to anything other than there's lots of distinct shapes. And I know Dick Hall, when he did his the UFO evidence back in 1964, had a chart in there of the shapes, and there's 10 or 12 different shapes that they're looking at. The military did the same thing in the late 1940s, where they tried to come up with 10 or 12 standard shapes for these sorts of things, but I'm just not sure that's very relevant. And you could also postulate, well, you've had one race looking at us for a while, and they go home, and another race comes, and we see an evolution of things. You might say you've got the airships from 1897, which sounds more like the people reacting to our level of science at that point, as opposed to something else. But you've got the airships, and then you move into the Foo Fighters, which there were some disc-shaped objects and that sort of thing. You get to the ghost rockets, and that may have evolved out of the Second World War and Sweden's proximity to Germany and some of the experimentation that was going on there with their vengeance weapons. And at the time, there was a theory that the ghost rockets were actually Soviet developments based on the vengeance weapons out of Germany, and they were flying them over Sweden as a sort of an intimidation factor to keep the Swedes from talking to the Americans or the British. But and there were approximately 100 crashes, I think, in Sweden of these things, or reported of these things, of which they found debris in 30 cases, but nothing that ever led back to that. And then we get now to the point where we get to read the Soviet files, because the Soviet Union no longer exists, and talking to some of the people, or communicating with some of the people in Sweden, we find out that there's no indication the Soviets were doing it. So now we're back to the point. Well, geez, we don't know what they were, but they were talking about the ghost rockets and being rocket shaped for the most part, and some of it was meteoric, and some of it was misidentification, as we see with UFOs here. But there's some stuff that that's just inexplicable.
Right.
Hey guys, we got to go to break for about 8 to 10 minutes, so we'll be back with you're listening to Kevin Randall on Church of Mabus radio show on UFO Paranormal Radio Network. We'll be back in 8 to 10 minutes, and see you in a few. We're just going to take a break. Joe was saying it over and over, and I was spaced out listening to you, and I didn't see it. That's normal for me. Wait. God. Yeah, if you need to go to the restroom, just don't hang up or anything, and we'll be back.
I'm gonna go get a drink of water or something, and I'll be back listening for you to return.
All right. Yeah, me too. Yeah, bye.
Breaking news. Strange black pyramid UFO ships over every major city on the Earth. People are exhilarated and scared. Reptilian strange creatures are on. My God, they're beaming me up with them. Don't put that probe there. Don't put that probe there. Don't put a... Ooh. Listen to the Church of Mabus radio show at 11 p.m. Eastern, Saturday nights with host Jeffrey Pritchett, bringing you the high strange. Visit www.churchofmabusradio.com. That's www.churchofmabusradio.com.
Blaze is supposed to be doing me a new commercial, but I don't know, he vanished.
Who?
Supposed to be Blaze, the guy's in a band. I had that commercial for a long time, and it upsets a lot of people, so I'm trying to make one that's not as upsetting.
Yeah.
We delve into UFOs, abductions, ghosts, aliens, conspiracies, and cryptozoology.
And how could you ever forget about those creepy topics you won't hear on your local news?
This is where I would insert my obligatory skeptical statement. The Mind Cemetery, where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest.
Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on Facebook. Also, check us out on our website, mindcemetery.com, for show updates and the critically acclaimed Mind Cemetery blog.
It's not critically acclaimed, but you should check it out anyway, mindcemetery.com.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we co-host a new show called News on the Flip Side. You can get every Saturday night, 8 p.m. Central, where we will be discussing current events and topics going on in the world today. We have opinions on everything. There's no topic that we won't discuss, and we'll go places that other shows wouldn't dare. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can catch it here, News on the Flip Side, only on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world needs to hear.
All right, we're coming back. Welcome back to the Church of Mabus radio show. We're back with Kevin Randall and co-host Beelzebub.
Indeed.
And I'm your host, Jeffrey Pritchett. That's right. We're talking about the commercial, the Tony Topping commercial in the chat room. A lot of people love it. A lot of people hate it. And we're supposed to have a new commercial and theme song from Blaze. He's working on it. So we'll appease the people that hate it. I'm not removing it because people hate it. I don't really have a problem with it. I've had UFO experiences. I've seen strange beings in my early 20s after my dad died and being healed from cancer. If I want to joke about something like that, it's my business. That's the way I look at it. So these people that are so uptight over a commercial that's like PG, if anything, just, put on your big girl pants.
Right.
But anywho, we're going to get a new one. I'm just getting a new one because I usually change it out every year, but it's not easy to get someone to, do you a commercial. They got to have, know about music. That's not something I can I don't know anything about music. I listen to it. That's about it. So it's not easy to find someone to get, a new theme song and a commercial for free. So luckily Blaze is working on that. But, yeah, big girl pants. I'm not sure where I got that from. Somewhere crazy. Oh, Stephanie Benetti wants an honorable mention on the show. Here's an honorable mention to Stephanie Benetti. There you go.
Done and done.
Yeah. So I guess, Kevin, before we delve back into some of the books, the topic, I'm kind of curious what you think about all this disclosure stuff. Me personally, I think it's never going to happen. It's a bunch of crap. But I'm kind of curious to what you think about it. Just, I'm sure you'd have a more articulate response than me, hopefully. But what's your take on all that stuff? I've just heard Bassett said that they're going to do it in December. I'm like, yeah, right. Come on. I don't buy it.
There is no motivation for them to disclose anything. I've always thought the only way it's going to happen is with some kind of craft landing somewhere where the news media can look at it and make inane comments about it and go on. I don't think we're going to be able to force it from our end. I think we got kind of close in the mid-1990s as we were, and when I say we, I'm thinking of Don Schmidt, Stan Friedman, Don Berliner, all of us who were writing about the Roswell crash at that point was generating so much interest in this thing, the Air Force felt compelled to respond. And so we kind of had them on the ropes at that point, but we allowed them to get off. Phil Klass had said that he thought the idea of them responding to us was just idiotic, that they just should ignore us and we'd go away. Of course we wouldn't, but he thought that was their best move, was just to ignore us. And when the Air Force blinked on this thing, and I don't think the news media understood what was going on. We were causing so much trouble with what they were hiding that they felt compelled to do something more to hide it even deeper. And originally, when they talked about it, their explanations, everybody laughed, and now we're down the road 15 years, and people are buying their explanations, which just astonishes me. But I think that was the time we got the closest. I think Steve Bassett is hosting this conference in Washington next week, and there's an awful lot of people who were high up in their various fields or their various governments coming over to share what they know with on the topic. So I think anything we do to generate publicity, get people talking about these things, get people discussing them intelligently and rationally, we're that much better off.
Right.
Yeah. Well, another question I had for you, how do you feel about all this serious documentary with Stephen Greer and all that? Like, I've heard both sides of the fences as far as, I know there's a lot of people that think it's positive, and of course there's a lot of people that don't like Stephen Greer, and I'm just kind of curious to what you think about that documentary as far as what you've seen so far.
I have not seen anything on the documentary other than just the little bits and pieces. I hope to see more about it next week.
Have you seen the little alien fetus or whatever? Or the little, I don't think it's a fetus, that little alien. It's like a foot tall or something.
It's one of those things, to me, it just doesn't make sense, but we need to, I need to look at the evidence and what he has in the way of evidence and whether or not his evidence has been vetted by independent sources. Is it just his people saying this about it, or has the information and the materials been submitted to independent testing and vetting? And that will be an interesting question, just to see what they have to say about it. And even when you get independent testing that kind of corroborates what you say, you're still going to get people who absolutely know there's no alien visitation. Ergo, that's got to be wrong. Right. And you run into those debunkers all the time. They will keep looking for a flaw in a case until they find something they can hang their hat on, no matter how small it is. And we go back to the Rhodes photographs on that one. Well, they didn't like his lifestyle. They didn't bother to find out that he held a number of patents. They didn't bother to ask the right questions. You know, they said, well, he has a laboratory in his backyard. They said it was a well-equipped laboratory, but apparently the guy was a genius when dealing with radio. But they don't bother mentioning that. Instead, they say, well, you know, he didn't have a real job, and he had this grandiose letterhead for his personal correspondence. So it's just that sort of thing. They find that little flaw, and they say, well, you can discount the whole thing, and it just doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, it just sounds like he was a little more eccentric than some of his detractors, and they just kind of blew that out of proportion, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the serious little alien. They say it's been around for like 10 years or something. And what I find peculiar about it is just if it is true that it's a race, it's supposedly like an adult. It looks like a fairy or something. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. I'll watch the film. I'm in contact with their media people trying to get a review copy, so if I can at least check it out, I'll see what I can do as far as writing something up on it. But yeah, I want to see it too. It's supposed to be next week.
You know, the one thing you just have to say is you can't be serious.
Yeah. Why so serious? Why so serious? So,
isn't the XM radio actually better than the Sirius? I don't know.
Yeah, definitely.
And now I'm guilty of what I accuse all the debunkers and the news media of doing is making light of the situation and bad jokes about it rather than waiting to see where the evidence takes us. So.
Well, I mean, we have to be able to make fun of things, even if it is true. You know, I mean, it's just. I think it's a good way to look at it. You know,
and the other side of the coin is sometimes in the UF field and I hesitate to use the term now, but we really do take ourselves too serious. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, exactly.
Well, Kevin, when I first saw your picture, I wasn't sure what to expect when I saw you in uniform. I was like, oh gosh, it's like a Full Metal Jacket sergeant, but you're really likable.
Yeah.
I was like, what's this guy going to be like?
I'm not a drill sergeant, so I didn't have to do that.
Right.
And the picture that I really like is in the desert camouflage uniform, but I'm sitting in the palace in Babylon where Daniel saw the handwriting on the wall, saw the writing on the wall when you read that Bible story about Daniel and the writing on the. I'm actually sitting in the throne room of that palace where that picture was taken. So.
Oh.
Yeah, that's pretty monumental, you know.
Yes, I got to Babylon.
Babylonian kings, baby, that's right. So in your chapter, Alien Bodies, what are some stories in there with alien bodies that you can share with us? There's Roswell, obviously, which we know most of that one, but what are some other ones in there regarding...
There's nothing else in there. No, I'm just kidding.
Listen, there's the Cape Girardeau recovery. There's a lot of words in here I have trouble pronouncing because I'm from Georgia.
It's Cape Girardeau. I'm of two minds of this. One of them is that the information is out there and it seems to come from reliable people. There's not a lot of documentation. There's not a lot of corroboration for it. But if it predates Roswell, I'm a little bit bothered by it because you would think that if this had happened before Roswell, when Roswell happened, they would have been better prepared for it.
Right.
But the other side of the coin may be that this information was held so tightly and in such a small circle that when Roswell happened, it took 3 or 4 hours to get the information communicated up to the right place, which is why you have the press release going out at Roswell saying we'd captured a flying saucer. Mm-hmm. But there was a story going around that Cordell Hall, who was a Secretary of State, I believe, in the 1930s, had an opportunity and told some friends about seeing alien bodies in the basement of the Capitol, which have long since been removed, of course. Mm. But the story came out. William Jones from Ohio investigated it for QFOs, and their conclusion was they weren't really sure at all. They couldn't draw any conclusion whether it was a hoax or authentic. They were kind of left in the lurch there, and I'm kind of in the same way. You've got some highly placed people talking about this sort of thing, but you can't, because it was so long ago, the 1930s, you just can't really get a good handle on it. When you move to Cape Girardeau, you run in sort of the same thing. You've got some very good people in the area talking about the one woman, Charlotte Mann, talking about how her father was involved in some kind of crash in that area, and called out to help out with being a minister, being a reverend, being called out to the crash site to administer last rites to these alien beings. Now, she said she had a photograph, which, of course, has long since been lost. And I say, of course, because I don't know how many times I've heard about the possibility of a photograph and chased it down to the end and never gotten my hand on the photograph.
Right.
The description she gave sounded like one that had been circulated in the UFO community at one point. Len Stringfield found a copy of that photograph, and it's got a couple of, looks like military people in trench coats with basically what's a monkey. Mm-hmm. And she said, no, that's not the photograph. It's a different photograph that had been lost. But she was, she seemed to be an honest, sincere person talking about this. The corroboration came from some family members, of course. They said, yeah, they'd heard the same story from the same people. And the sheriff's brother at the time, not the sheriff, the brother of the sheriff at the time, kind of corroborated his brother had been involved in sort of this and told him some of the same sort of things. So you've got it from two different sources coming there, but you have nothing other than the secondhand testimonies of family members. You don't have the people who are directly involved. So you have to look at it with that kind of magnifier on it, qualifier on it. That we don't have the first-hand testimonies. When you get to Roswell, of course, we've got first-hand testimonies about that. And when we get beyond Roswell, we've got some additional stories. I'm not thrilled with a lot of those stories. The alien autopsy film springs to mind, which we all should remember. That's pretty well proven to be a hoax at this point. Even the guy involved in it, Ray Santilli, has said that parts of it are hoax. The guys who made the film have said, yeah, here's how we did it. Philip Mantle provided me with photographs of various stages of creations of the aliens. So when we look at the alien bodies in that respect, I mean, from the alien autopsy film, we can pretty well write that off. And I think when we're doing UFO research, if we're doing proper research, then we're obligated not only to report the unusual and the mysterious as accurately as we can, but we have to report the hoaxes as well. We have to say, we've got to move this out of the arena. This should be a footnote to our studies because it adds nothing to it and it detracts from it. And so, Philip Mantle was very kind in providing me with a lot of information about how that whole alien autopsy hoax went down, providing me with photographs of the creatures and how they put them together and the drawings and the people who were involved in it. So, when we look at the alien bodies, we go from stories that are secondhand at best to first-hand stories in the Roswell case onto some of the hoaxes that have been generated around this. And the alien autopsy, of course, got worldwide attention. So, and the thing that really annoys me about that is I think they spent about $100,000 making the video, making the various parts of the video, and they were selling the raw footage on videotape for $50 a pop, and they sold over 1 million copies. Not to mention the licensing fees. They got X number of dollars from the United States. They got it from Australia. They got it from France. They got it from Japan. They got it from Germany. So they got the licensing fees from all these various countries for the broadcast rights of this specific story. So they made a carload of money, and they didn't give any of it to me, which really annoys me.
Yeah.
harms the research so much. That's the big crapola about it for sure.
Right.
But if you're going to look at the UFO field, what I want to do in that book, and the alien autopsy is a conspiracy. You know, these guys got together to create this thing and make some loot on it. So I think it's incumbent upon us to reveal that information as well. You know, if we've got the information, we've got to reveal it. If on the other hand, Santilli and the boys had remained quiet about the hoax, and you could, I think, have a legitimate argument about whether or not it is authentic. I think by the time they admitted it was a hoax, everybody pretty well understood that it was a hoax. Having that final bit helped a great deal, but looking at the footage, looking at the things that Santilli had done prior to the release of the footage, and during all the information about it, and how the information shifted from this to this to this, and things disappeared, and when I say things disappeared, there was at one point he had photographs of the security classifications on the film canisters, and people went out, that's nothing we'd have been using in the United States, and suddenly those photographs disappeared, never to be seen again, because they harmed the story he was telling. So by the time it became fairly obvious it was a hoax, everybody pretty well knew that.
Right. So it wasn't a big shocker anymore.
No.
Yeah.
But it's part of the whole, I guess, history of the UFO field. So we've got to cover it and make sure that everybody understands. I don't believe the alien autopsy was real.
Right.
I didn't believe it back in 1995 when it first came out. After I'd looked at the thing, I had an opportunity. The guys from England had come to Roswell, and took me down to Roswell, so I could comment on the film. So I got to see the footage before it was publicly broadcast in the United States. I got an opportunity to see it then. And I saw some of the things, and I was bothered by the fact that you could identify nobody in the footage at all. There was no faces there. There was always some mechanism to prevent you from seeing the people involved. Here is an opportunity to investigate an alien body, and they seem to be very haphazard about it. They seem to know what they were doing. Yeah. And the autopsy takes like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm thinking, you're dealing with an alien specimen here.
Yeah, right.
It's going to take you weeks,
right,
to do anything.
Like, we're satisfied.
Look, here's this little lens. We'll just pull it off the eye.
Right.
And people went off. I had a friend from the medical field. They said, there's a Bunsen burner in there, and I said, so what's the problem? He says, the morgue is usually down in the bottom of the basement of the hospitals and whatnot, because the accumulation of the gases could get an explosion. So you're not going to have a Bunsen burner in the morgue burning, with an open flame like that. He said it looked like a dress set to him more than a real autopsy. So I mean, by the time we got to the point where they said yes, it's a hoax, we pretty well knew it.
They're just doing that to look more sciencey,
But the thing is, $50 a pop, and they've got a worldwide audience, and they made a carload of money. And I'm thinking, I'd have put $10,000 up for that, for a cut of the 50 mil.
Yeah.
Well, late last year, I got a DVD from Reality Entertainment, a review copy, Alien from Area 51, and it's the same thing. It's that. So they're still popping some cherries off of it, I think.
Well, if you remember the great Penthouse magazine. One of the few times I ever bought Penthouse magazine, they had a picture of the alien in it. And they said, we've gone out and done this thing. We've got photographs of the aliens killed at Roswell. And so I got a copy of the magazine. I looked at it, that's the creature from the movie, Roswell. But that Showtime had done. I recognized it immediately. And I said, this is the one that's on display in the Roswell UFO Museum, because I'd been there and I'd seen a photograph of it, and you could see the injuries on the one pictured in the magazine as the same injuries of the one, the dummy, the thing, the mock-up made for the movie. I actually debated Bob Guccione on a couple of radio programs about that, and I said, that's from the movie. He said, well, how do you know they didn't have photographs of the real aliens and they modeled it after? I said, because I was there and I know what they used. I'm the one that was supplying them the information.
Yeah, they even got the... I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeffrey.
I was just saying, I interviewed the guy that made that Roswell movie. I'm trying to remember his name, but he also did Jesus. Yeah, he did Jesus in India, too.
Yeah.
Paul Davids was one of the producers of the movie. I was involved in as a technical advisor. You read the credits, which I've always do in the movies now because I always look for my name in case it shows up.
Right.
And in the Roswell movie, it actually shows up. You actually can see my name before the movie starts, and after the movie is over, my name appears in the credits twice. I was the military advisor and a technical consultant.
Nice.
So I have. If you look me up in the Internet Movie Database, I'm actually there.
Nice. Yeah, they actually spoofed the whole alien autopsy thing in the X-Files also with I think it was a message from Jose Chung, or it was an episode that had Jesse the Body Ventura in that, and and it was all based around a crashed aircraft and missing Air Force pilots and this mysterious autopsy video, and that's pretty funny, really.
Nice. I have to see that one. I have all the X-Files, but I've seen all the alien mythology, but not all the standalones. Like, I watch all the standalones. There's one with Jack Black. There's all kinds of rare gems in there. But yeah, Paul, I interviewed him on Examiner, and we got into that movie and Jesus in India. It was definitely pretty interesting for sure.
Well, moving back to Bob Guccione, I understand he paid $200,000 for those photographs.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, I had a lot more and better ones, and I'd have certainly sold him the publication rights for $200,000.
Right.
But once again, I missed out.
Wow, $200,000. My goodness.
I don't know whether he paid that for him or not. That was the rumor that circulated, that he paid $200,000 for those photographs, which may explain why the magazine is out of business.
Right.
I can say that because he died, didn't he? Don't have to worry about land
so. Yeah, we can talk about the dead. So, one chapter in your book, The Robertson Panel, that's pretty much about the sightings over the Capitol in 1952. What do you think about that event?
Well, there's actually two different questions there, because the Robertson Panel was a study of all the UFO information that had been gathered up to that time from 1947 to January of 1953, and the Robertson Panel was an outgrowth of the Washington National sightings, which are very, very interesting, because when you talk scientifically, you want multiple chains of evidence. Eyewitness testimony would be one of the chains. Photographs would be another chain. Radar sightings would be another chain of the evidence. So you've got multiple chains of evidence leading you to the conclusions. At one point, you have radars at 3 separate locations showing the objects. So it's not a malfunction on one specific set or one specific group of sets in a single location. It is actually 3 different radars at 3 different locations showing these objects. So you've got interesting corroboration there. You have attempted intercepts going on over Washington, D.C. in July of 1952. I'm going to digress for just a moment because I found in our local newspaper, the Cedar Rapids Gazette, the greatest headline I've ever seen. Banner headline across the front page of the paper said, "Saucers swarm over Capitol," for the July of 1952 sightings. I'm thinking, this is the kind of thing you'd see in a science fiction movie. Saucers swarm over Capitol. Earth versus the flying saucers. Anyway, so you've got these sightings on 2 consecutive Saturday nights. You've got intercepts attempted. I talked to Dewey Fournay, who was the Air Force or the UFO liaison guy in the Pentagon, about what had happened because he was there, and Al Chop, who was a civilian running the UFO desk for the military. Both of those guys were there, and talking about that, Fournay, I believe it was Fournay, said that one of the sightings got pretty hairy. And I said, "What do you mean?" So I can't really talk about it. Well, I called Al Chop, and we were chatting, and I said, Dewey Fournay said that one of the sightings got pretty hairy. He said, "Yeah, the pilot got surrounded by the lights, and it just really freaked him out. And I'm thinking, oh, thank you. That tells me what I need to know. Guy's name was Patterson, by the way, the pilot's name.
Yeah.
That's the old journalist trick where or investigative trick where you just drop something in like you know all about it, and the other guy spills his guts and fills in the details for you. But the sightings, they just couldn't really identify what was going on there. You've got military pilots on intercepts seeing the things. You've got the airborne radars locking on these things. You've got airline pilots seeing the things. You've got people on the ground seeing the things. You've got the radar seeing the things over these 2 consecutive Saturday nights in July of 1952. The Air Force finally said, well, it was a temperature inversion over Washington causing all of this stuff. And I think, and they kind of talk about how you'd have a boat down on the river moving along, and the radar beam would bend in this inversion layer and pick up this boat, so you got the motion. But the other thing is, well, then you don't get it on 3 sets. You get it on 1 set. And the other thing is, it doesn't explain the lights. The temperature inversions don't glow.
Right.
There's no mechanism for them to glow. So you've got people seeing the things. You don't see a temperature inversion. And I think again, it's just an example of let us throw explanations out there until we get something that kind of sticks to the wall, and then we'll run with it.
Right.
But for a long time, the Washington Nationals, as they were called, were not identified, and now they're kind of written off as these temperature inversions. But it's a very interesting series of sightings, and it was a thing that built up throughout the spring and early summer of 1952 until you get to the Washington Nationals, and then the sightings kind of drop off. But you've got lots and lots of sightings. The Air Force, according to the statistics the Air Force kept, they had 1,505 sightings in 1952. It's the most they ever had in a year. And of those, 303 were unidentified, according to their statistics. The other thing is, when you look at the Project Blue Book files, things have changed. Cases have dropped out. Cases have disappeared that are referenced in other arenas. And one of the things I think of specifically is there was a case from April of 1947, before Arnold, where the guys were talking about disc-shaped objects that worked for the Weather Bureau in Richmond, Virginia. And that case is not in the Project Blue Book files, but if you go to the Project Grudge final report, it's incident number 79. And so you read a little bit about incident number 79, but you can't find the case in the Project Blue Book files. So you're saying, well, how did these guys know about it? It's not in the Project Blue Book files, but they have no record of it. How come they're referencing it in this final report? So you have that sort of problem in it, and it carries on through. But the big year for UFOs in the Air Force records was 1952, and that was part of the Washington Nationals, those sightings over Washington, D.C. The Robertson panel then came about because, according to the story, President Truman was interested in finding out what was going on over Washington, D.C., and commissioned the Robertson panel to look into it. But it seems to be that this was a set-up job, that the Robertson panel wasn't really to investigate UFOs, it was to explain UFOs. The report seems to have been written before a word of testimony had been taken. The people you'd expect to be there were excluded from it. Robertson seemed to have salted the panel with people he knew were rabidly anti-UFO, so you couldn't get it. They're talking about two of the movies that were taken one of the movies taken in 1952 at Tremonton, Utah, and they're just bright lights in a blue sky. I mean, there's no detail or anything, but they're maneuvering around the sky. And after they see that, miraculously, Robertson says, well, here's a picture of here's a film of seagulls. Well, you can identify them as seagulls. Their motion is remotely similar to the motion you see of these objects over Tremonton, Utah. But here's something interesting. Well, we're going to be reviewing this. Well, we just happen to have this seagull footage laying around.
Right.
So we'll take a look at that and compare it. So there's a lot of hinky things, but what the Robertson panel did was they said, well, there's no national security implication here. The Air Force really shouldn't be bothering with this stuff. They got better things to do with their time, and we should start a campaign to debunk these things for the public, so they'll lose interest in it. You know, teachers should not be allowed to give credit for reports about UFOs and or books read about UFOs, and explanations should be given. You know, if you've got an explanation, get the word out quickly about what it is. If you have no explanation, well, keep your mouth shut. So they were kind of trying to manipulate the media into following their instructions on UFOs.
Right. So what were these explanations based on that these people on this panel were presenting? Was it just how they were defining UFOs themselves?
I think what's going on there is they didn't have access to the really, really good stuff.
Okay.
They're looking at cases, and you can kind of understand some of this because you're talking about a pilot that sees something for 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. You don't get a really good look at it that way, and there's no physical evidence laying around for you to examine. So they're looking at it from that point of view. There's also already been, back in 1948, the guys at Project Sign, which was the first Air Force investigation of UFOs, had done what they called an estimate of the situation. What you do in intelligence work, when you have something going on and you're trying to figure it out, you write an estimate of the situation and you send it around and get other people's opinions. Well, there had been an estimate of situation created about UFOs, and they concluded that they were interplanetary craft, and I say interplanetary as opposed to interstellar because in 1948 they were thinking in terms of interplanetary.
Right.
And so they're alien craft in essence. They sent it up. The chief of staff says, "No, you don't got it. You don't got it." And I think of the line Joyce and Robards delivered in All the President's Men, where they've given him one of the Watergate stories, and he's looking at it and says, "You guys don't have it." And I think that's what Vandenberg did. He looked at the information they had and said, "You guys don't have it. You have not proved the extraterrestrial." And when some of the guys from Sign went to argue for their estimate, suddenly they're on the outs. The people who believed in the extraterrestrial, they're now all gone. Well, I'm Joe, Air Force officer. I've seen what's happened to the guys who believe that UFOs are extraterrestrial.
Right.
They're not moving up the ladder very fast. The chief of staff, the number one Air Force guy, doesn't believe UFOs are extraterrestrial. At least this is the face he's putting on. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go against this guy. So the policy turned around. Everything was explainable. And I think when you get to the Robertson panel, they just had they looked at the movies. There are two movies. The Montana movie, it's a short film taken in 1950 over Great Falls, Montana, of two lights moving across the sky, foreground detail, all that sort of thing, and the Tremonton movie, which is just the lights in the sky. And they look at those movies, and you're thinking, well, there could be other explanations for this. There were supposedly two jet fighters in the area that might have accounted for the sun reflecting off the aluminum skin of the fighters, giving this disc-shaped appearance to them over the short range that the movies that the guys taking the movies.
Right.
So you've got sort of legitimate explanations. If you'd seen the entire movie, the Air Force apparently removed a bunch of the beginning of the movie, and I think Barry Greenwood had done an analysis of the length of the film and discovered there was quite a bit missing from the beginning of the film. As Nick Mariano, the guy who took it, said, well, when I got the film back from the Air Force, they'd taken a bunch of it out, so the really good part of the movie was gone.
Right.
But I mean, so they look at that. They look at this movie. They don't have any real physical evidence. They're looking at just basically eyewitness testimony. And I think, and Robertson was a guy that he didn't believe it, and he sold the panel with people who didn't believe it. So unless they came up with something extraordinary, you're not going to change your opinions. And the report was already written. So by the time they finished testimony on Friday, the next morning, Saturday morning, the very next morning, Robertson's got a rough draft of the damn report and is circulating it to the other members of the committee to get them to sign off on it. I mean, that's just not the way these things normally work.
Right.
They finished up late Friday afternoon. He went home and did the final report, without a computer, I might add.
Yeah.
Which would make it a lot easier.
That's Right. That's pretty insane. Yeah. So in a way, it seems like they're really trying to influence what people thought about UFOs.
Absolutely. Their attitude was if they could explain it.
It's not a mystery,
People would lose interest in it. Well, that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But what is frightening about this, and it's something that goes on today in our environment on a lot of different things, is the way all kinds of groups are trying to influence what we read, what we see, what we hear, what we believe.
Right.
And that's exactly what they were doing in this very narrow way with the Robertson panel. They were trying to influence what we thought about UFOs, and they were trying to push us into this point of view of there is no such thing, there can be no such thing, therefore there is no such thing, therefore you shouldn't believe it.
Right.
And I'm not sure why they felt they were the keepers of the flame on this thing, meaning simply what difference did it make to them if a bunch of people thought there were flying saucers? It's
right. Why would they need to police that thought?
I've never understood. I can understand. Well, the skeptics want to explain the alien autopsy film. We're all for that because this is a hoax.
Sure.
But I've never understood why they felt it necessary to attack people who are researching this, who are serious. Phil Klass, and I got on my blog, I said something about Phil Klass routinely wrote to the employers of people talking about, to tell them these people are talking about flying saucers and get them in trouble. And a couple of skeptics came out and said, well, he didn't routinely do that. Can you prove it? And so I came up with 5 examples where Klass had done exactly that. Tried to cause trouble for people who had an opinion different than his. I don't get that. If you don't want to believe my opinion, that's fine.
Sure.
I'll present you with the evidence. If you want to listen to the evidence and think about it, that's all well and good. If you want to reject it out of hand and believe your opinion is superior to mine, that's fine with me. I'm not going to call your employer and try to cause you trouble because you don't agree with me. And yet Phil Klass was doing that sort of thing.
That's kind of sociopathic behavior,
Well, I think part of it was getting even because he came up with this preposterous idea that flying saucers were ion-charged bits of the atmosphere that would glow.
Right.
And he came up with this idea after the sightings in Exeter, New Hampshire, because they had been seen near power lines as well. They could cause an electrical charge ionization there, and these things would glow.
I'd never heard that before.
Oh, yeah,
until right now.
Yeah, he did that in the 1960s. Published it in Aviation Week and Space Technology, where he was an editor. And some of the scientific community, like James McDonald, just said this is stupid. This doesn't work. They don't glow. There may be ionization pockets in the atmosphere, but they don't glow. And if your answer explained these cases, then it would be all over the place, and we'd know about it. Right. And so Klass went after McDonald, accusing him of using Navy funds to investigate UFOs, which he hadn't done. But he got him into trouble with the Navy, and so
that's pretty heavy.
He was successful with that. There was another guy named Jacobs who talked about a UFO sighting in California. He did a thing in. After he got out of the Air Force, he went back to school and got his PhD and was teaching at a college or university, I think in Maine. And he had published this thing in the MUFON Journal about this UFO sighting. And Klass wrote to the dean of the college, or the president of the college or university, and said, this guy's talking about UFOs and blah, blah, blah. And I think the difference was the Navy was concerned about Aviation Week because it's a very powerful magazine dealing with funding of projects in the Washington D.C. area for the military. So if Aviation Week got after him, it would be a bad thing. The guys in Maine, they didn't care about Aviation Week because they couldn't do anything to him. So they said, "Go away, Phil." But I mean that's the sort of thing that goes on if you. And it seems to be the other way mostly, where the skeptics are attacking the believers. There's sometimes when the believers go after the skeptics in a similar fashion, but mostly it seems to be going the other way.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, people really do just drive it into the ground times. I mean, to a point where it's like, do we really even have to take it that far? I mean, can we just agree to disagree, and move past this?
Well, interestingly, Colonel Weaver, who did the Air Force report on Roswell, I've had some communication with him, and it's been very, very cordial.
Yeah.
I never really explained who I was, but he knew who I was, and we've had some very cordial exchanges on that. So we agree to disagree on this sort of thing.
Right.
But I mean, I've been attacked by practically everybody in the UFO field, and it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on. They've all gone after me. I've been accused of being on Majestic 12. I've been accused of working with Hector Quintanilla on Project Blue Book. All kinds of things. I've been accused. I've been accused of not actually having the military background that I claim to have had. All kinds of things going on.
Right.
That's what they do. That's like I was talking about those people calling the victims at Boston the actors or whatever. I got accused of being a government spook shield this week because I told them they were crazy. So that's what they do. If you don't go along with the bandwagon, you're a spook or whatever. Blah blah blah.
Let's not go along with the bandwagon.
Somebody owes me a back check, seriously.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting.
That's that seems to be the unfortunate thing about free thought, is that it eventually just closes in on itself, and people kind of get grouped up and into these ideas. And like what Jeffrey's saying and what you're saying is that as soon as you disagree and you think that something is not nefarious, then you're a bad guy, Yeah,
and we've seen in the UFO field. I mean, we've had arguments about the credibility of certain witnesses, and we found out that their credibility hasn't been what it was claimed to be. But oftentimes, the skeptics will come after us for believing these people. But most of the times, it's we who discovered the truth about them. The skeptics didn't do the work. We did the work. And they say, well, you believe this guy. Yeah, and I'm the one that exposed him as well.
Yeah.
So, that part of it.
Right. Yeah, it's like, it's easy to be duped sometimes, especially if somebody comes at you with all this great information that seems to be, more than you could have imagined, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've always kind of liked Brad Steiger's attitude on this, which was, you come to him with the story, he's going to believe you.
Sure.
Because he thinks of people as being good, he's going to believe you right up till the time he finds out that you've lied to him, and then he's going to tell everybody the truth. And I think I like that attitude, but I think as an investigator, and Brad's really not an investigator the way some of us are, researchers the way some of us are.
Sure.
He's more of a gatherer of information and a reporter of that information, as opposed to someone who gathers the information and vets it very, very carefully. And that's the role he's accepted for himself, and he's very good at it, and he's a good friend of mine too, I should say.
Right.
We talk periodically. I've had to get away from that, because I was of the same attitude. I think people wouldn't be making up these stories if they weren't true. They're just so complex.
Why would you?
And then you find out they've made the whole thing up. The one that comes to mind, the classic for me, is Frank Kaufman, who claimed to be right in the middle of the Roswell case, and every time you begin to doubt him, he'd come up with a document. And I should have been suspicious when he wouldn't let us have the documents to be vetted. He'd show them to us, but he wouldn't let us have them. And after he died, I think it was Don Schmidt and Mark Rodiger and Mark Chesney from the Center of UFO Studies. They went down to Roswell, and they were visiting with his widow, Juanita, and she said, well, could you look at his stuff? She wanted to make sure that there were no contracts that he had signed to provide information or appear on a program before he died, and everything was okay. And they were going through his office with her permission, and they discovered the stack of old World War II stationery, it says buy war bonds on it and that sort of thing. Found his 2 old typewriters, found his real service record, and we discovered that he was making this stuff up. So what do you do at that point? So, well, Frank Kaufman's information is no longer good. And so what you do is you report that. And I know that, to their credit, Mark Rodiker, Mark Chesney, and Don Schmidt didn't want to say anything right away because they thought it would hurt his wife, Juanita, who very nice woman, and they didn't want to cause her any undue anguish, which is very good.
That's respectable. Yeah.
Yes, but the moment I found out, I said, no, we got to go. And so Mark Rodiker and I put together a couple of articles for International UFO Reporter. In the interim, Juanita had passed away as well, so we weren't hurting her at all. Right. And that was one of the reasons Rodiker agreed to do it, but we just had to do it. We had to do it. And even though now everybody says, well, Kevin Randall believed Frank Kaufman. Yes, I did. He always had the document. He showed us his separation papers from the Army, which proved what he was saying was true. There's a picture of him in the Roswell yearbook getting a medal. After this came about, I looked at the medal carefully. I think it's a World War II Victory Medal. It's a black and white photograph, and it's at an angle I can't quite tell, but I think it's a World War II Victory Medal, which they gave to everybody who served in the military during World War II, and I don't understand why they were the presentation in 1947 of the World War II Victory Medal when Kaufman was a civilian on the base. I don't understand that, but the picture was there, and this kind of led us to the belief that he might be telling the truth.
Right.
But once we found out the truth, we had to go forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, especially when so much is based on it, on his evidence and what he's talking about, and so many people have based their beliefs around it.
Well, if he'd been standalone, there was no other evidence. There was nobody else talking about it. I mean, every officer we talked to who served on Colonel Blanchard's staff in 1947, with a single exception, said the thing was alien. Edwin Easley told me flat out. I said to him, are we following the right path? He says, what do you mean? I said, we think it was extraterrestrial. He said, well, let me put it this way. It's not the wrong path. I mean, here's the provost marshal telling me the craft was alien.
Right.
So we've got that kind of thing, and so Kaufman fits into that thing. He just provided information from a different point of view for us, and so we're getting minor corroborations for what he says, and then of course it all blows up when we got our hands on the real stuff. So we found that he had altered his separation papers, so it looked like he'd been a master sergeant. He'd been a staff sergeant. He had no intelligence training. He claimed he had extensive intelligence training. His real document proved he didn't. Now, if anybody wants to vet my military record, they're welcome to write to the National Archives in St. Louis and ask for it, and you'll see that everything I've said is verified by the records there. I don't even have to get involved. So I keep waiting for, and I think people have done that. I think people have actually tried to verify my military career and found out I've said I've been honest about what I've said about it. So they can't come up with it.
I mean, you also, from what I know about your military career from Wikipedia, which is not the best source of information,
and I had nothing to do with the Wikipedia page.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't seem like you have super out of the ordinary military credentials. I mean, the stuff that you've done is really awesome and everything like that, but it's not unbelievable,
I think of it as a pretty routine military career.
Yeah, I mean,
I got into some gunfights in Iraq. I got into some firefights in Vietnam. That sort of thing, but nothing spectacular. Did my job in both those arenas and came home and that sort of thing. So there's everything I've said is true.
Right.
I know some people have attacked that too. Says, well, one guy says, well, Randall's experiences in Iraq were nowhere near the Rambo type stuff he's talking about. So what have I said in front of this guy?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound
I never
like
said anything like
being
that.
Rambo. Yeah. I mean,
well, if you pronounce my name really fast, you could say it's like Rando, so it's close.
Right.
But I mean, I never said anything like that. I did the job I was sent to do, and came home from doing it.
Hey guys, we're at the end of the show here, and Joe just said we had -1 minute.
Well, then we're pretty well done, I guess.
Yeah, it's been great having you on, Kevin. And you have a site link or something you want to share?
If you go to kevinrandall.blogspot.com, you can get to my blog, or just type a different perspective into your search engine, and it's usually the first thing that comes up under that. Looking for some UFO cases, type a UFO case. Eventually, my blog shows up on those too. So there's lots of ways to get to it. But it's Kevin Randall at blogspot.com. There's my books are available on Kindle. They're available at Amazon, and you can go to the bookstore and find them there too.
Awesome.
All right, everybody, and that's Alien Mysteries, Conspiracies, and Cover-Ups. That's by VisibleInkPress.com. Thank you all for listening. You're listening to UFO Paranormal Radio Network, and we'll catch you next Saturday. Beezer will be back when we talk about Sierra Sasquatch. We're going to get our Squatch on. That's right. So everybody have a good weekend and stay out of trouble, and watch out for martial law. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Take care.
And we're done. We're clear?
Yeah, we're clear. Thanks, Kevin. Take care, man.
Hey, it was a great deal of fun.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.